All right, well, I'm back here with Dwayne Green, guest on my channel, coming to you live from Canada.
Yeah, Canada,
yes. Yes. And actually, he's live right now, but when everybody sees this, it will not be live. But actually, I have to say, yes, you are alive. That's good. I don't find talking to dead people on my channel is very interesting. So I try to talk to living people. But I do want to say, listening to you speak, I don't pick up a lot of a Canadian accent, really. I'm going to tell you, I was listening to your video and I heard you say about, and it sounded pretty much the way I would say about. You know, it's.
You want me to say about?
That's what I expect sometimes when I hear.
That's what I'm talking about, eh?
Yes, exactly. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
That's right. Yeah. So you don't actually usually talk with that accent?
No, this is just how I normally talk. This
Yeah.
is when I'm talking about Bibles, when I'm talking about stars, when I'm talking about whatever, about.
That's right. Well, speaking of stars, that's
Stars.
exactly what we're going to talk about here. Astronomy in the Bible. And again, I will say this, that Dwayne actually has his own YouTube channel here. And if you want to check that out, I encourage you to do that. Subscribe to his channel, watch some great video content that he has there. One of his videos here is with me, actually. So like I said, it's good content, but he's got a variety of things about the Bible. Right. And Dwayne, I haven't asked you this before, but what do you do aside from making YouTube videos?
Well, I mean, I work.
No. You do, really?
Yes, I do.
That's good.
We have 4 children, so they keep us busy a little bit. And then I had a number of hobbies, but I'm really paring them down because I can't keep up with everything. But one of the things that I like to do is astrophotography. So I'm not particularly great at it, but it's really fun to see some of the results, and it gives you an excuse to, get out of the house and look up.
Well, so let me show one of those pictures that you sent to me here. And this is one of the perks of living in your area that you live in.
I'm in a rural setting, right? So for all you space geeks out there, we have Bortle class 4 skies, and so that enables us to see a little bit more than what you're going to see in like a light polluted city. So the image you're looking at here, this was actually captured in June, and this was when Comet Neowise was coming by. I don't know if you recall seeing it in the news, but it was a pretty big event. And this was just captured with a regular, I think this was a 50 millimeter lens. Stack up about 40 or 50 images together, and you do a bit of processing, and you can come up with something like this.
Wow.
So this is probably my favorite image right there, actually. Just because
I'm really impressed with this. This is a beautiful image. The comet is just so clear here. And I tried to find this comet when it was visible, but it was very hard to see where I live, even though I live in a fairly rural area, but we're very mountainous here. Yeah. And this comet just wasn't that easy to spot, unfortunately.
Well, that's the tricky thing, is because if you have mountains on the horizon, it's hard, because this comet specifically was really low on the horizon. So you would have to have a pretty clear view out, and we're talking 6 or 7 degrees from the horizon. So it's pretty low down there. And then of course the light pollution when you're that low on the horizon is also more intense. So if you're in a larger city, very difficult to see. You have to get out about 25-30 minutes on the highway to get a good view of it.
Yeah, well, astronomy has been in the news a little bit more recently.
Yes.
We had the convergence of the two
Saturn
planets.
and Jupiter.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it has literally been cloudy since late November here. Tonight was actually the first night where we've had clear skies. That's the thing about astrophotography, is that you have to have a whole bunch of like conditions to be just right to get some decent photos. Like, we're not talking just about clouds, but if there's like high level clouds, which are typically invisible to us, they could be picked up by the camera. If there's like right now, it's kind of straddling the freezing mark, so 0 degrees Celsius. I know I'm talking to probably a bunch of Americans, so you'll have your Fahrenheit numbers.
Yeah, could you please convert that for me?
Yeah, somewhere around 32.
No,
So what
yes,
it does
I
is
do
it
know
causes
that.
yeah, it causes a little bit of fog and a lot of condensation. So your lenses get all condensed, and the fog obstructs the view, and you don't get to see, half the detail that you would otherwise. And then atmospheric conditions have to be right. So if there's a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere, that will really affect your images. And then on top of that, the phases of the moon are going to get in the way as well. So if you're looking for some of those nebula or deep sky objects, if it's a full moon, like, might as well pack up your stuff and wait. So a lot of things have to be right.
It's all a matter of degree as far as how much you're able to see and enjoy all of it. And what you're talking about is very different than where I come from, because I came from Trenton, New Jersey, between Philadelphia and New York City, highly populated area.
Yes.
And it's actually very easy to spot the Big Dipper in New Jersey, because it's pretty much those are the only stars that are actually out. It's like, oh, there it is, because there's only like 10 stars that you can see at any given time. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but coming up to New Hampshire, it was so much better. And where I live, you can get out a little bit out of town and you can see the stars pretty well. If you go to northern New Hampshire, it's more like where you live. And, you get up into the mountains, up in kind of the middle of New Hampshire. I've been up there and have seen the satellites going overhead. I think the International Space Station, you can see things a lot more easily when you're in good places like you live.
Oh yeah, it's really nice out here. Like there's a photo I gave you there. It's the North Star. So it's really just a star field. I'll let you pull that up if you can. So the North Star, it's one of the easier ones to image. I mean, because when I don't have a star tracker, so it makes things difficult. The Earth moves, and so when you have a long exposure on the camera, you end up with these like streaks for stars instead of dots. But if you point at the North Star, the movement isn't quite as big, because that's right at the convergence point of the movement. And so you can have a little bit of a longer exposure, and you can see how many stars are actually out there. Like there's a lot. And so you think when God told Abraham that his descendants would be as the stars in the sky, like that's a lot. We don't have a number on that. Maybe we have a number on the ones we can see or that are a certain magnitude of brightness, but I mean, that is a lot of stars. And that really gives us the significance of that promise that God gave to Abraham. And it's just, this is the fascination for me when it comes to outer space and the stars and astronomy, not astrology.
We do want to clarify that. Some people were ready for this episode to be about their horoscope, and they were waiting for you to read it for them.
That's right. But just the size of the universe, and like just each star is absolutely humongous, right? And so the thought is like, how big is God that he can create all of this? And I mean, when you read through the account in Genesis, it talks about the stars, but just kind of like mentions them as kind of.
Yeah, here it is. Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens. And it says, and he made the stars also at the end of verse 16 there.
He just kind of like casually plops it on the end of that, right? He made the stars.
He also made some stars, yeah. And the other thing you were talking about, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him? It's just such a vast heavens.
Of him. Yeah, we're so tiny. But that's like the fascination. I mean, even if you look at there's another image there. I have it's a small section of the Milky Way. So the Milky Way in the northern hemisphere, which is where we are, you don't quite get that center spot, but there's a spot on the arm called the Sagittarius star cloud, and it's just this blotch of really intense amount of stars, and then around it there's, you know, 4 or 5 different nebula just within that small region of the sky. And it's just something else. Like, you look at that and you think, wow, God is amazing, to be able to create all that. So
yeah. Now, another thing I want to bring up is how, you know, the scripture does talk about, you know, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows his handiwork, day unto day utters speech, night unto night reveals knowledge.
yeah.
And it's interesting because the stars really are speaking to us, and I think that's what I hear you talking about. It stirred me up even from the time I was young, when I learned about stars. They are speaking to us, and sadly, you know, a lot of our culture just looks at the stars and thinks of Star Trek and Star Wars and science
right.
fiction.
Yeah.
And, you know, science fiction is fun, but it's actually
But
rooted in humanism. The
absolutely,
idea that we are our own, the makers of our own destiny, and that the world is really all about, you know, whatever is here. It's not about God.
Yeah. And I mean, like, scientists today spend like their entire lives using stuff they find in space to try to prove that we didn't come from God, right? It's I don't understand how you can like look at everything and then, you know, like Richard Dawkins would say, you know, it came from nothing, or Neil deGrasse Tyson, it came from nothing. Like, it just, having that much matter, that much organized stuff out there, like, how can that just, you know, blam, you know, Lawrence Krauss style, come from nothing? So it's fascinating to me that two people can look at that, at the evidence we see, at the stars, at the order we find in the universe, and one can conclude that there's a God, and then the other one would conclude that there is no God.
Well, did you know that Richard Dawkins, and I'll try to get the quote, but he basically says that when he looks at the universe, it does stir up a sense of worship.
Yes,
Might call
yes,
worship
I
in him.
remember that.
So even he can't deny that feeling that he has of this. There's something that this is all about. You know, it has some sort of meaning inherent within it, and that's exactly what the scripture is talking about. The heavens declare the glory of God. You
That's
can't
right.
escape that feeling of
You
awe
can't,
and worship,
no. Like, Carl
even if you
Sagan
don't.
did the same thing in his what was the name of his documentary? I remember watching it in school. But Carl Sagan starts it off in that introduction that they, you know, the stars, they show wonder and amazement, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but the idea he was giving off is, you know, something that makes us just be in awe. So
So more specifically now, the message of the stars is actually something we see in scripture with the birth of Christ.
That's right.
Yeah. Because it says here, after Jesus was born, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." And from what I understand, that these were men who maybe could actually be traced back to Daniel's time, in terms of, you know, Daniel might have had influence in the way that they saw things, looked at things, and these wise men certainly were looking at the heavens, weren't they? And
definitely.
they saw the star in the east. Did you have any
there's
comment?
lots of yeah, it's one of those things, right? It's a historical event that occurred, and I've gone back into some like software that we have to see if I could find some sort of astronomical event that occurred about that time, and I couldn't find anything. But I mean, we can go on and surmise or suggest maybe that they saw a comet and it rested over the baby Jesus when the Magi were coming, or whatever. But I mean, the reality is we don't really know exactly what they saw, but we know that they saw something that the Bible narrator calls a star. So I tend not to get too hung up on that, but I just trust
I
that
wouldn't get hung
the
up.
narrative.
Yep, I
Yeah.
wouldn't get hung up on what it is. Although that, that's certainly fine to study and try to figure out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I agree. I don't think we know for sure. What I think is fascinating is that they say we have seen his star.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they knew whatever they were
They
looking
knew it
at.
was, yeah.
They knew that this was pointing to a king.
But I mean, if you go back into Genesis, for example, when it tells you that he made the stars, it says he made them for signs and for
Amen.
seasons. Now, I mean,
Yes.
some people would misinterpret that and see the
Yeah.
zodiac. The zodiac is
Yeah.
right, and we should be looking to the stars for a future. Of course, you wouldn't do that. That's silliness. But the idea that the Magi would see a star and know that that's Christ's star, I mean, that lines up with Genesis in
Hmm.
saying that there are four signs and seasons. Which, of course, there's a greater implication because, well, now God has imprinted the story of salvation in the stars, right? So
Yes.
if he knows that the Christ is coming, if the Magi know that he's coming and they know to look to this star, and that star has probably been there since the creation of the world, we know that God had ordained the plan of salvation from the
Mm.
beginning of time. So
Yeah.
it goes a lot deeper than just mentioning a star, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
if you think on these things, right, if you really give them time to meditate on them, they really get into your soul and really get into your heart.
Yeah. And
And that's where we want to be as
I
believers.
certainly believe that the ancient peoples, you know, looked at the stars and were very cognizant of what was happening in the heavens. We know that they did. And we are the same way today. I mean, this is why you got into
Yeah,
astronomy, it just draws
yeah,
you.
yeah.
But yeah, I agree. They're for signs. They're certainly pointing to God's creative power, as even Paul talks about. Since the creation of the world,
That's
God
right.
has given evidence of Himself.
That's right.
So there's that. But it's fascinating, and I did a little study on it back in Bible college. Some people do believe that God even put gospel pictures in the sky, and that historically it's possible people would have known stories about God by looking at the stars and seeing those stories. I don't know a lot about
Yeah,
that, but
yeah. I've seen a little bit of that. And my instinct is to kind of say, well, no, I wouldn't read too much into that. But
mhm.
I'm no expert. I haven't done any like huge studies on that specifically. But yeah, I
Yeah,
wouldn't read a whole lot into that.
I don't know either, but at the same time, we're talking about people that existed, so long ago.
That's right.
I just, from what I know, even reading the Bible, they they thought about things and told stories about things, and we may not know, specifically what they said back then. But it's neat to think about that
Yeah.
people, since God created the world, people have been looking up at the heavens, and there is a message there. But you're right, we don't know exactly
Yeah.
what they thought about all
Yeah.
those things.
It's not laid out for us nicely in scripture, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, but here's an interesting a little interesting tidbit, a fun fact, if you will. So coming from space, so we just recently saw the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, and unfortunately I missed it because it was cloudy. Go figure. But this brings out like a neat little fact about how ancient astrology or ancient astronomy would have seen these planets, right? Because they don't move like the rest of the stars do. They tend to like wander, throughout the
Mm-hmm.
sky night after night. And if you were watching the conjunction, you would have seen it get closer and closer to the horizon as each night came. And so obviously we're not the only smart ones, right? Smart people lived 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. And so they've noticed these wanderings that were these stars that kind of wander in weird ways. And so they called them planets. And that's where we get the word planet from. And in Greek, we have planao, which is a word which means to lie. Which is quite literally to wander, and so we get the word lie from these stars in the sky that move in weird patterns, right? They just sort of wander about.
Mm.
The idea being that you wander from the truth. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, nifty little word study for you.
Yeah, that's
Planao.
cool. So maybe you know this, but when they looked up at the stars, they could see Jupiter, Saturn, Mars. They could see Venus. What planets in our solar system were discovered post, telescopes and everything? Would that just be Pluto?
You know what? I'm not entirely
I'm
sure.
I'm asking you like trivia here.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Like initially, my thinking would be anything beyond Jupiter would have, or sorry, beyond Saturn would have likely need to be found with a telescope.
Yeah,
That's my general thinking.
maybe
Um,
Neptune.
yeah, Neptune, Uranus. I say
Yeah,
Uranus because I don't want to have to deal with the silly
yeah,
snickers of calling it the other
right.
name. By the way,
Yeah,
that's actually comes from the Greek Uranos, which means heaven.
cool.
Just so you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then yeah, Pluto, which apparently is no longer a planet. I grew up learning that it was a planet, and now our hearts are
So
crushed.
the same thing happened in Canada, apparently.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh well. Well, that's one thing we can agree on is we're dealing with the trauma of losing Pluto,
As
even
a
if
planet.
we don't measure distance in the same measurements.
Yeah.
Of course, when it comes to space, I guess we all measure in light years.
That's right.
But you would define light years in terms of kilometers.
Oh, stop with the questions.
Yeah.
I think it's
I didn't ask how many. I'm not gonna ask you how many. I
it's
know
a
that
lot.
light.
300. It's 300 and something thousand.
Yeah.
Or is that the speed of light? I think that's the speed of light. I don't know how many kilometers it is. It's a lot.
I think
We'll just say a
light
lot.
in the United States, we say that light travels like 186,000 miles per second. So I mean, I don't know how fast you define that in Canada, but either way, it's really fast.
It's probably faster than your limo.
Yes, it's definitely faster than my limo.
Yeah,
So we'll wrap up here. I'd love to talk to you even more in the future. I'm sure we will, but I think,
absolutely.
the bottom line, what we're talking about here is that, you've been very fascinated, and maybe in the future, you can talk more about how you actually got into it, but it's cool to just get some of your thoughts as someone who not only is interested in astronomy, but you actually have learned how to do certain things. You take really beautiful pictures, and I just want to say that drew me in when I've seen on Facebook some of these pictures that you've shared. It's really awesome.
Good. Well, thank you again. Yeah, Tim, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I'm really glad you have awesome stuff, and so I take the opportunity to share your stuff whenever I can too. So
thank you, and I'm very grateful that we live in a time like this where God allows us to meet people because we have internet technology.
That's right.
And we probably wouldn't have known who each other was if it weren't for the internet.
That's right.
And it allows us to talk like this and do a video like this. So that's good too. Thank you so much, Dwayne. Hope to talk to you again. Hope you have a good night.
All right. We'll see you around, Tim.
Bye.